Strength coaches are continually looking for ways to improve an athlete's response from strength training sessions. When examining the literature on athletic training, both the amount of load and the speed of the lift are key factors for performance outcomes. This emphasizes the intent of movement, specifically barbell velocity, which plays a crucial role in optimizing strength adaptations. The concept of velocity-based training is nothing new. It is a common addition to most strength coaches' toolbox. Acutely, velocity-based training, or VBT, can be used to track velocity loss within a set and establish thresholds for exertion, helping coaches monitor fatigue in a session. Longitudinally, it helps track overall performance improvements by encouraging athletes to lift at higher speeds, which leads to better strength, power, and athletic performances such as counter-movement jump and sprint speed. From a mechanistic point of view, lifting at a faster velocity has been shown to be more beneficial at the level of the muscle, with a higher percentage of myosin heavy chain 2X muscle fibers maintained. Therefore, based on the evidence, methods to improve barbell velocity during a strength training session would be seen to be preferential. This is where the addition of wearing blood flow restriction cuffs could provide an avenue to assist in enhancing barbell velocity. For those unfamiliar with blood flow restriction, or BFR training, it is a specialized training method where additional pressure is applied to the most proximal region of the arms or legs to partially restrict arterial inflow and restrict the venous outflow in working musculature during exercise. This additional pressure is applied using a special cuff, and when worn for appropriate amounts of time, this results in an accumulation in metabolite concentrations due to the BFR cuff restriction. The accumulation of metabolites, commonly called metabolic stress, is thought to be a key stimulus for triggering a cascade of biological responses that promote muscle adaptation. This includes increases in anabolic hormone production, muscle protein synthesis, and muscle fiber recruitment, all of which contribute to the adaptive benefits of BFR training. In BFR resistance training, these preferential mechanisms are activated using low loads, and the most common loading parameter for BFR use corresponds to loads of around 20 to 40% of 1RM, with improvements in both strength and muscle hypertrophy the primary outcome. These improvements are surprising considering that traditional strength training requires loads of at least 60% of 1RM to stimulate increases in strength, and loads more than 80% of 1RM to stimulate strength gains. Despite the evidence for low load training, improving muscle strength and hypertrophy, my own observations training athletes using BFR for over 15 years is that they still need to incorporate high load lifting into their strength programs for that transfer to athletic performance. Also, we must remember that most of the low load BFR strength training studies have used participants who are not athletes, or at least don't possess any major strength abilities. To date, there are a few studies that have looked at the acute effects of wearing BFR using moderate to high loads in both the squat and the bench press. Focusing on the bench press in 2020, Wilkes and colleagues investigated the effect of BFR on bench press velocity and power outputs at loads of 70% of 1RM. The testing protocol involved 3 different interventions. Firstly, without BFR, BFR with a narrow 4cm cuff, and BFR use with using a wide 10cm cuff, where the participants were tested on 1 set, 3 repetitions against a load of 70% of 1RM. The inclusion criteria required a bench press 1RM of at least 1.2 times their body weight. In this study, barbell velocities were greater for both BFR interventions over not wearing the BFR at all, that's the control group. And the wide 10cm cuffs resulted in the fastest barbell velocities. Whereas when we compared the narrow BFR cuffs against not wearing BFR cuffs, there were still improvements in bar velocities, but these were more moderate when we compared against the wider cuffs. In my opinion, The positive effects for wearing a narrow 4cm cuff, although not as great as the wider BFR cuffs, does have practical importance, as a narrower cuff allows for a full range of movement. In another study by the same author, the participants completed 8 sets of 2 repetitions, progressively increasing loads from 20 to 90% of their 1RM. There were 3 interventions, a control where the participants didn't wear the BFR cuffs, and 2 BFR conditions, intermittent BFR and continuous BFR. In the continuous BFR, the cuff pressure was kept inflated across all of the sets, whilst in the intermittent BFR condition, inflation pressure was released during each 3-minute rest interval. They used a narrow 4cm cuff for this study, and the participants needed a minimum bench 1RM of at least 1.2 times their body weight. Focusing just on the results for the intermittent BFR protocol, the magnitude of the effect for each loading varied, but overall it showed a positive effect for the addition of wearing BFR cuffs to improve the bar velocity. Interestingly, this was more pronounced for the loadings of 20 to 50% of 1RM compared to the heavier 70 to 90% of 1RM. Although this is speculative, my thought is it could be suggested that by the time the participants got to the higher loads, they may have been more fatigued by wearing the cuffs and or lifting at those higher bar velocities. Irrespective, these 2 studies show promise for the inclusion of wearing BFR cuffs in moderate to high loads. Although not significant from a t-test or p-value viewpoint, further detailed statistics revealed small to large effects in favour of wearing BFR cuffs. In athletic populations where performance gains are often subtle, effect sizes can provide a more meaningful measure of the magnitude of an intervention's impact. Unlike p-values, which merely indicate whether a result is statistically significant, effect sizes quantify the practical importance of changes, such as wearing BFR cuffs during training. This approach offers greater ecological validity, allowing coaches and athletes to assess real-world improvements that may not reach statistical significance, but are still valuable for performance enhancement. Furthermore, in both of these studies and the other moderate to high load BFR studies, there have been no negative effects of wearing BFR cuffs. For those who have concern of using BFR cuffs, lifting high loads, this is a positive. Now that we've set the background information, it's time to turn our attention to this study. The second Wilks study that I just mentioned formed the framework for this case study, with a few refinements. For simplicity's sake, we focused on just one BFR intervention, and that was using an intermittent protocol. Furthermore, we focused on testing loads between 50 to 90% of 1RM. In athletic populations, these loadings are more realistic, and any loadings below this are normally used for the warm-up. A narrow cuff was used as this allowed for uninhibited and full range of movement. The Wilks study was also important with respect to the statistical analysis performed in the case study. Being a case study, the scope for statistical analysis is somewhat limited. Typically in a single subject design like this, we focus on absolute and percentage differences to identify trends and effects. While this information is useful, it lacks the depth needed for a more comprehensive understanding of how the intervention might apply to a larger population or different contexts. Therefore, to enhance the depth of the analysis, I incorporated the data from this second Wilks study as the population was similar, and so was the intervention protocol and the cuff width. By integrating this additional data set, I could perform a more detailed analysis. This allowed me to go beyond simple differences and calculate effect sizes, smallest worthwhile change, and confidence intervals. These measures provide a richer picture of the true impact of the intervention. For example, while a percentage difference might show an improvement, the effect size quantifies the magnitude of that improvement, allowing us to understand how meaningful the change is. Effect sizes were calculated to quantify the magnitude of improvements with Cohen's thresholds classifying 0.2 as small, 0.5 as medium, and 0.8 as large effects. This allows us to determine how meaningful the improvements in barbell velocity were under the BFR condition. When calculating the smallest worthwhile change, we want the observed changes to exceed this value to consider the intervention favourable. The smallest worthwhile change is a benchmark that tells us whether the improvement is large enough to be meaningful in practice. It was determined as 20% of the standard deviation of the reference data. If the effect of the intervention exceeds the smallest worthwhile change, it's likely to be practically beneficial in real-world athletic performance. And a confidence interval gives us a range where we believe the true value of an effect lies based on our sample data. If we say a result has a 95% confidence interval, it means that we are 95% sure that the true value of the effect, like the improvement in barbell velocity, falls somewhere within that range. For example, if BFR increases barbell velocity to 1.03 meters per second, and the 95% confidence interval is between 0.9 and 1.10, we are 95% sure that the true velocity improvement is between 0.9 and 1.1. Ideally, we want the confidence intervals for BFR and the no BFR, or the control group, to not overlap. This means that the two conditions are likely different, and the intervention had a real effect. By using these statistical tools, we move beyond simple observations and into the realm of practical significance, helping us to determine whether the BFR intervention is not only statistically relevant, but also beneficial for broader athletic populations. Looking at the case study protocol, the first session was 1RM testing, and a BFR familiarization session was also performed. The participant was a well-trained male who regularly performs high-load strength training. At a body weight of 105 kilos, he lifted 160 kilos for the 1RM test, resulting in a relative 1RM of a touch greater than 1.5 times his body weight. And if you are familiar with any kind of strength-related studies, getting data on participants with this kind of strength is lacking. Although there was a BFR familiarization session, it's important to note that the participant is a regular user of BFR, which was another advantage of this study as it negated any effects for familiarization or intervention novelty. 7 days after the 1RM test and 1 week apart, the two bench press interventions took place. The first intervention was the bench press performed without wearing BFR cuffs, and the second intervention included wearing the BFR cuffs. The BFR cuffs were inflated to 80% of limb occlusion pressure of the upper limb, and an intermittent inflation protocol was used. For the two intervention sessions, after a standardized warm-up, the participant performed 5 sets of 2 repetitions, increasing loads from 50 to 90% of 1RM with 10% incremental steps and 3 minutes rest between sets. A linear transducer monitored mean barbell velocity for every repetition. For the data analysis, the best repetition for each set was used. Let's now dive into the results. At 50% 1RM, the barbell velocity in the BFR condition was 1.03 meters per second compared to 0.88 meters per second without the BFR cuffs. This represents a 17.1% increase in barbell velocity when wearing the BFR cuffs. The effect size for this difference was 0.73, which falls into the range of a moderate effect. 60% of 1RM, the velocity with BFR cuffs was 0.86 meters per second compared to 0.78 without the cuffs, leading to a 10.3% improvement. The effect size here was 0.4, which is classified as a small effect. At 70%, barbell velocity increased from 0.69 in the no BFR condition to 0.73 meters per second with BFR cuffs, resulting in a 5.8% improvement. The effect size for this increase was 0.22, which is a small effect, but still notable. At 80% of 1RM, the BFR condition resulted in a barbell velocity of 0.63 meters per second, compared to 0.53 without the BFR cuffs. This corresponds to an 18.9% increase in velocity. The effect size here was 0.74, indicating a moderate effect. At 90% of 1 RM, the participant's barbell velocity increased from 0.41 meters per second in the no BFR condition to 0.52 meters per second with the BFR cuffs. This is a 26.8% improvement in velocity, which is the largest percentage increase observed across all the loadings. The effect size was 0.76, which again indicates a moderate effect. In summary, the results of this case study suggest that the use of blood flow restriction cuffs during moderate to high load bench press improves barbell velocity across a range of intensities. From the perspective of velocity-based training, these findings hold great potential. The addition of wearing BFR cuffs during strength training sessions longitudinally may lead to greater improvements in key performance parameters such as strength, power, and ultimately transfer to athletic performance. For athletes who have a high chronological and training age, this can have even more meaningful impact as the opportunity for improvements decrease. Additionally, it's important to note that no adverse effects were observed during the intervention. Despite concerns that moderate to high load BFR training might increase the risk of injury or discomfort due to the restrictive nature of the cuffs, this study supports the notion that when applied by experienced practitioners, BFR is a safe and effective method. The participant completed all sessions without incident, reinforcing the idea that BFR strength training can be safely incorporated into high-load strength programs. This is consistent with the previous studies, which also found no negative effects when using BFR in combination with these same loads. This provides reassurance for strength and conditioning coaches looking to integrate BFR into their training regimes. In conclusion, the use of BFR cuffs during moderate to high load strength training shows great potential for enhancing barbell velocity with implications for improving strength and power over time. While further research is needed to explore the long-term effects, this study provides evidence for a safe and effective method that can be integrated into strength programs to support athletic performance gains. And if you do have any questions, make sure you leave them in the comments below. Thanks for listening.